I built a road on my own land so I could keep my farm alive. 2 months of clearing brush, grading dirt, hauling gravel, paid for every inch myself. The morning it was finally finished, the HOA put up a steel gate across it and sent me a bill for $300 a month to use my own road. They thought I'd hook up a chain and tear it down. They were wrong. I didn't destroy the gate. I destroyed everyone behind it, legally. I remember standing there in the early light, coffee still warm in my hand, staring at that gate like it had grown out of the ground overnight. Square steel posts sunk deep into fresh concrete. A keypad bolted on at eye level. A small black camera, angled just right, pointed straight at where a man's face would be if he lost his temper. The sign was clean. Too clean. Authorized vehicles only. Road access fee, $300 per month. And at the very bottom, in small print, almost like they hoped no one would read it, managed by Access Management LLC. No county seal. No official HOA letterhead. Just a generic company name demanding my money. That was the first thing that didn't sit right with me. This wasn't a warning. It wasn't a notice. It was an invoice. I'd spent weeks fighting rocks and roots in summer heat to bring that road back to life. Coming home with dust in my hair, hands shaking from the vibration of machinery. Back aching in ways you don't complain about because the work matters. It wasn't just a road. It was a lifeline. The day before, I'd driven it for the first time. Slow, careful, gravel crunching under the tires, no detours, no signs telling me where I could or couldn't go. It was open, it was quiet, it was mine. And now, there it was, a lock on my work, a price tag on my freedom. I could already hear what people would say. I didn't even need the comments yet. It's your land. Tear it down. No one gets to block your road. I'd have that gate gone in 5 minutes. They weren't wrong about one thing. I had the equipment, I had the strength, I had the right. But what they didn't see, what that gate told me the second I looked at it, was that this wasn't about stopping me. It was about baiting me. And the moment I understood that, I knew this fight wasn't going to be loud. It was going to be slow. It was going to be quiet. And it was going to end very differently than they expected. People think this story is about a road. It isn't. It's about what happens when someone decides your work matters less than their rules. I work a piece of land in the north part of Clearbrook County, right where the tree line breaks and the fields open up. My family has been on that ground longer than the subdivision signs have been standing. Long before trim hedges, covenants, and committees, telling grown men how loud their lives are allowed to be. My father worked this land, his father before him. Not because it was easy, and not because it made anyone rich. They worked it because land, once you've bled into it long enough, stops being property. It becomes responsibility. We never had much in this family. No lake houses, no investment portfolios, no safety nets made of paper promises. What we had was dirt. Dirt we paid taxes on. Dirt we broke our backs on. Dirt that fed us when nothing else did. That dirt taught me something early. Order isn't something you impose. It's something you grow into. It comes from rhythm, from seasons, from work done the same way for decades. You don't vote it into existence. You earn it. Clearbrook Meadows didn't understand that. They liked the idea of living near farmland, the view, the quiet, the postcard version. But they didn't like the dust, the diesel, the hours. They wanted the land frozen in time, like scenery behind glass. At first, I stayed out of their way. I drove slow through the neighborhood. I waved, I smiled, I kept my head down. Their rules didn't touch me until they did. Heavy vehicles banned from 6 in the morning to 6 in the evening. The exact hours a farm operates. Permits required for excessive traffic. Fines for dust complaints. Warnings for noise that wasn't noise at all. Just work. They dressed it up as safety. Community harmony. Quality of life. But crops don't care about HOA calendars. Livestock don't understand board meetings. And buyers don't wait around while you negotiate permission to do your job. I tried to adjust. I scheduled deliveries at dawn and dusk. I ran trucks in the dark. I planned my days around rules written by people who'd never hauled feed or fixed a fence in the rain. It didn't matter. One missed delivery turned into two. Two turned into a canceled contract. A buyer my father had worked with for 20 years called me and said he couldn't keep waiting. Not angry, just practical. He had his own margins to protect. That's how it happens. Not all at once, not dramatically. Just enough pressure, applied long enough, until a man starts slipping. I remember sitting at my kitchen table late one night, invoices spread out, coffee gone cold. The numbers didn't bend. They didn't care how hard I worked or how long my family had been there. I thought about my father, about what he'd say if he saw me asking permission to reach my own barn. I could picture it, the slow shake of his head. Not angry, just disappointed. That was the moment I understood something I hadn't wanted to admit. This wasn't about rules. It wasn't about safety. And it sure as hell wasn't about community. It was about control, about whether a man who worked his land still had the right to reach it on his own terms, about whether legacy meant anything once a committee decided it didn't fit the view. And once you understand that, you stop looking for compromises. You stop hoping things will improve. You stop believing the next meeting will fix it. You start looking for another way in. That was when I remembered the old road. The old road wasn't something I found on a map right away. It came back to me the way most truths do, quietly, when you finally stop lying to yourself. I was parked outside the HOA office one morning, engine idling, waiting to go inside and ask permission to keep doing the same work my family had done for generations. I remember looking at the building's glass doors, the little sign with office hours neatly printed, and thinking how strange it was that my livelihood depended on whether a room full of people liked the sound of my truck. That's when I remembered the back pasture. Behind the far fence line, past the stand of cottonwoods, there was a strip of land no one ever talked about. Overgrown, forgotten. A tangle of brush and saplings most folks treated like the edge of the world. When I was a kid, my father used to point that way and say, almost to himself, "Used to be a service road back there. County ran it before the highway went in." At the time, it hadn't meant anything to me. Roads come and go. Kids don't think about access. They just assume it will always be there. But sitting in that truck, staring at a door I didn't want to walk through, the memory landed differently. I turned the engine off, didn't go inside, just sat there a moment longer, hands on the wheel, and made a decision I hadn't known I was ready to make. I drove home and pulled out every map I had, county plats, old surveys, yellowed PDFs pulled from an online archive that looked like it hadn't been updated since dial-up. It took hours to find it, and even longer to be sure, but there it was. A thin, barely visible line labeled unmaintained public right-of-way. Part of it cut straight through my property. The rest traced along the edge, untouched for decades. It wasn't a loophole. It wasn't clever. It was simply something everyone else had forgotten. I called my daughter that night, Ellie. She's studying civil engineering at the community college in town. Smart kid. Quiet until she isn't. The kind of mind that sees structure where others see mess. I told her what I'd found, asked her if she wanted to take a look. She didn't ask me why, didn't lecture me about risk. She just said, "Send me the files." The next evening, we stood in the weeds together, looking at what used to be a road, or what would be again if the land allowed it. Saplings with trunks thick as fence posts, thorn vines wrapped tight like they were holding a grudge, old fence wire half buried in the dirt, rusted and sharp. Ellie walked the line slow, survey pole in hand, marking elevation changes, checking runoff paths. She didn't talk much while she worked. When she finally looked up, she said, "It's doable, but it won't be easy." I smiled. Easy hadn't kept this farm alive this long. We brought in Lane a day later. I've known him since high school. The kind of man who can fix a diesel engine with baling wire and stubbornness. He showed up with equipment that looked older than the HOA bylaws and twice as reliable. A brush cutter, a grader, an old case dozer that still ran mean if you treated it right. The three of us stood there that first morning, sun just coming up, looking at a wall of green that had swallowed the road whole. Lane spit in the dirt and said, "Hell of a place to put a road." I nodded. That's the point. Because this wasn't about convenience anymore. It was about independence. We didn't rush. We didn't cut corners. Ellie checked grades and drainage angles so rain wouldn't wash our work away. Lane cleared brush a foot at a time, engine growling like it resented the vines as much as we did. I hauled debris, rock, broken posts, and whatever else decades of neglect had piled there. By the end of the first week, it didn't look like progress. It looked like exhaustion. But something important had already happened. I wasn't asking permission anymore. And once you stop doing that, the ground under your feet feels different. Work like that doesn't stay invisible for long. You clear enough brush, move enough dirt, and someone eventually asks questions. Not because they care what you're building, but because they don't like that you didn't ask first. The first sign they had noticed wasn't a letter or a fine. It was a woman standing at the split-rail fence one morning, heels sinking into dirt that wasn't made for them. I heard her before I saw her. There's a sound to a farm road when it's alive. Engines, boots, wind through wire. High heels don't belong to that soundscape. They click like punctuation marks in the wrong sentence. She watched us work for a while without saying anything. Clipboard tucked under one arm, sunglasses on. The kind of stillness people wear when they think authority speaks for itself. "Good morning," she said finally. "I'm with the Clearbrook Meadows Homeowners Association." I shut down the engine and climbed down, wiped my hands on my jeans. "Morning." She didn't ask my name, didn't ask what we were doing. She looked past me, down the line we'd cleared, eyes tracing the shape of the road like she was memorizing it. "We've received concerns," she said, "about this construction." That word, construction, landed heavy. It was chosen carefully. "Concerns from who?" I asked. She smiled, not unkindly, just practiced. "From residents, about erosion, about traffic, about how this may affect the community's viewshed." I almost laughed. Almost. The view she was talking about was a distant line of trees and fields that had existed long before Clearbrook Meadows was poured out of concrete and cul-de-sacs. But she said it like it was fragile, like a man working his land could somehow break the horizon. "This road has proper drainage," I said, "sloped away from the subdivision. Water runs back toward my pasture, same as it always has." She nodded, jotting something down. "Even so, the HOA has an obligation to preserve aesthetic harmony and environmental stability." There it was, the phrase that explained everything. Aesthetic harmony. A sentence so vague you could drive a bulldozer through it and still call it compliance. I told her about the easement, about the county right-of-way, about the surveys we'd pulled. I offered to show her the maps. She waved it off. "That may be so," she said, "but when changes impact the broader community, oversight becomes necessary." Necessary for who? I wondered. I didn't argue. Not yet. I just said, "This land is mine, and the road is on it." Her pen paused. She looked at me over the top of her clipboard for the first time. "We'll need to review this," she said. "In the meantime, I'd advise you not to proceed further." Advise. Another careful word. She left the same way she came, heels clicking out of rhythm with the place. Lane watched her go, then looked at me. "That wasn't about dirt," he said. "No," I answered. "That was about permission." The letters came a few days later, polite, professional, printed on heavy paper. They never said stop. They said review pending. They never said illegal. They said potential environmental impact. They cited sections of the HOA bylaws about visual continuity, runoff liability, and traffic flow. All written broadly enough to mean whatever the board needed them to mean that week. They didn't claim ownership. Not yet. They claimed concern. That's how control works when it wears a tie. You don't grab something outright. You surround it with language. You call it protection. You call it responsibility. And while the other guy is busy proving he's not a threat, you move the boundaries. I read every letter twice, not looking for insults, looking for intent. What struck me wasn't what they accused me of. It was what they didn't ask. They didn't ask for engineering reports. They didn't ask for drainage calculations. They didn't ask for mitigation plans. They assumed authority first, facts second. And that told me something important. They weren't worried about erosion. They weren't worried about views. They were worried about precedent. Because once one man stopped asking permission, others might remember they didn't have to either. We kept working, not louder, not faster, just steady. Because nothing scares people who live by rules more than someone who follows the law and keeps moving anyway. And somewhere between the next letter and the next morning's work, I understood that this was no longer about whether I was allowed to build a road. It was about whether they were going to let me exist outside their control. They hadn't stopped me yet, but they were getting closer. Clearing brush under a summer sun is the kind of work that doesn't leave room for anger. There's no space for it. Your body takes over and your mind follows behind, quiet for once. Swing, cut, drag, stack, repeat. You don't argue with thorns. You don't negotiate with roots. You just keep moving until the land gives up what it's been holding. That first week, progress didn't look like progress. It looked like exhaustion, like sweat running into your eyes so often you stopped wiping it away. Like gloves soaked through by noon and hands blistered anyway. Lane worked the brush cutter slow and steady, engine growling like a tired animal that still had plenty of fight left in it. Ellie walked ahead with her survey pole and bright vest, marking grade lines and drainage angles, stopping now and then to crouch and study the soil like it was speaking to her. I hauled debris, branches thick as fence posts, rusted wire someone had dumped decades back, broken signs, old posts, the quiet evidence of how long this place had been ignored. By sundown every day we were dirty from the eyebrows down. Dust clung to sweat, shoulders burned, backs ached in that deep, honest way that lets you know you did something real. There was peace in it, not the polite kind you get sitting in a meeting room, listening to someone explain how harmony requires sacrifice. Always someone else's. This was different. This was the kind of peace that settles into your ribs when your body is tired and your mind finally shuts up. The kind you earn. In the evenings, we sat on the tailgate of the truck, boots dangling, eating whatever we'd thrown together that morning. Ham sandwiches, cold apples, water gone warm in the jug. We didn't talk much. We didn't need to. We just looked at the narrow corridor we'd carved through the brush, raw dirt, and hacked edges catching the last light. To anyone else, it probably looked ugly, incomplete, but to us, it looked like freedom taking its first breath. One evening, Ellie wiped her forehead with the back of her glove and said, almost casually, "People think roads are for going somewhere, but they're really for coming back." I looked at her longer than she expected. Sometimes your kids say something so true, it lands harder than any argument ever could. Lane snorted. "Careful," he said. "Keep talking like that, and we'll have to paint your quotes on the barn." She threw a pebble at him. We laughed, the tired kind, the good kind. By the second week, the land started to change its mind about us. The brush line retreated. The ground beneath showed itself, hard in places, forgiving in others. Lane brought in the grader, the sound of its engine rolling through the pasture like something ceremonial, metal against earth. Not domination, conversation, shaping just enough. Not too much. Ellie checked slopes again, recalculated runoff paths. She explained why water had to move the way it wanted to move, not the way we wished it would. I listened. I trusted her. This wasn't guesswork. This was craft. Truckload after truckload of gravel came in. I hauled it myself, tires crunching down paths that hadn't seen traffic in years. We spread it, leveled it, packed it down. The surface took shape slowly, like the road was deciding whether it was willing to exist again. And then one morning, we stood there and realized it already did. A lane of fresh gravel ran between the fence line and the tree shadows, silver in the early light. Not pretty, not polished, but solid, honest, real. I remember the exact moment the road became more than a project. I eased the old Chevy out of the barn and rolled onto the gravel. No speed, just enough throttle to feel the tires settle. The sound was unmistakable. Crunch, crunch, crunch. Each stone shifting into place like it had been waiting. No speed bumps, no cameras, no neighbors watching from behind hedges. Just a straight line between my work and the world. Lane stood off to the side, leaning on a shovel, arms folded. He gave me a nod, the kind men give when words would cheapen the moment. Ellie jogged ahead so she could film it on her phone, not to post anywhere, just to remember. As I passed her, she smiled the way she used to when she was little and convinced I could fix anything with a wrench and patience. The road wound through the back pasture, crossed near the fence line, and ran clean out to the county highway. No detours through clear brook meadows. No signs telling me when I was allowed to move. When I reached the end, I didn't say anything. I just sat there, hands on the wheel, breathing. Something loosened in my chest that I hadn't realized had been tight for months. That day, I drove to town in the middle of the afternoon, bought feed, picked up parts, dropped off produce, talked to people I hadn't seen in a while because I'd been too busy working around other people's rules. No rushing, no calculating, No planning my life around a clock I didn't control. I came home 2 hours earlier than usual. Ellie and Lane were already up on the ridge, sitting on the tailgate, legs dangling. I grabbed a couple of beers and joined them. We watched the sun slide down behind the tree line, the gravel catching the light like river stones. It felt different, not louder, not dramatic, just steadier. Like my life had clicked back into alignment. For the first time in a long while, I felt like I was steering again, instead of being managed. I thought the hard part was over. I thought the work had been the test, that once the road existed, once it was real, that would be enough. I didn't know yet that the moment something good takes shape, someone somewhere starts figuring out how to take it from you. But for that evening, just that one, the road was quiet, open, breathing, and it was ours. They didn't come back angry, that would have been honest. They came back with paperwork. It started with an email just after sunrise, the kind that pretends to be helpful while quietly tightening a rope. The subject line read, "Environmental Review Notification. No accusations, no threats." Just a polite reminder that the Homeowners Association had an obligation to assess potential impacts on community welfare. By noon, it was a letter, heavy paper, clean margins, language so careful it could have been cut with a ruler. The kind of writing that never says no outright, but never lets you say yes either. They cited 3 concerns. First, erosion risk. According to them, the new road altered natural drainage patterns and could redirect runoff toward community properties. Never mind that Ellie had calculated every slope and cut every channel to send water back where it had flowed for decades. The claim didn't need to be true, it just needed to sound technical. Second, traffic management. They warned that increased agricultural traffic posed a safety concern for residents. This from people who had chosen to build a subdivision next to working land and then complained when it worked. They attached photos, carefully framed, of my truck entering the road, dust hanging in the air like evidence. Third, viewshed preservation. That one landed differently. According to the bylaws, the HOA was responsible for protecting the visual character of the community, the horizon, the sense of openness, the feeling people paid for when they bought in. As if a gravel road cut low into the earth could somehow scar the sky. I read the letter twice, not for tone, for intent. They weren't calling the road illegal. They weren't calling it unsafe. They were calling it subject to oversight. That word again. Oversight. I called the number at the bottom of the page. The woman who answered spoke softly, like she was used to calming people down. She thanked me for my cooperation before I'd agreed to anything. I explained the drainage, the easement, the surveys. I told her the road followed the land the way it always had. She listened, she agreed. She said all the right things. Then she said, "Even so, the board needs time to evaluate mitigation options." Mitigation, another careful word. "What kind of options?" I asked. There was a pause, not long, just long enough to be intentional. "Controlled access," she said. "Usage limits, monitoring." Monitoring. I asked whether the HOA had jurisdiction over the road. She didn't answer directly. "When changes affect the broader community," she said, "authority becomes shared." Shared with whom, I wondered. The next day, 2 men in khaki shirts and clipboards showed up near the fence line. Not inspectors, not officials, consultants. They took photos, made notes, pointed at patches of ground that had held water long before Clearbrook Meadows ever existed. "That puddle's been there longer than your bylaws," I said. One of them smiled thinly. "We'll note that." Lane watched them leave and shook his head. "They ain't here to learn." "No," I said. "They're here to build a story." And the story was simple. A farmer, acting alone, altered the land in a way that threatened community safety and aesthetics. The HOA, reluctantly but responsibly, stepped in to manage the risk. It sounded reasonable, it looked responsible, and it was just vague enough to fool anyone who didn't live here. What they didn't see from their clipboards was that the road wasn't new, it was old, older than their rules. We hadn't changed the land, we'd restored it, but restoration doesn't scare people who live by committees. Independence does. Another letter arrived, more pointed this time. The board requested a temporary pause in use while they completed their review. No timeline, no end date. Just temporary, stretched thin. I didn't stop using the road, not out of defiance, out of necessity. That's when the language changed. The next email mentioned liability exposure. The one after that referenced insurance implications. Then came a sentence about potential remedies. Remedies. I stood on the road one evening after the letters stopped coming, gravel cooling under my boots as the sun went down. The place was quiet again, but it wasn't the same quiet as before. This one felt watched, measured. I realized then they weren't trying to stop the road. They were trying to own it without ever saying the word. They weren't going to argue with me in daylight. They weren't going to fight me on paper. They were going to put something in my way, something heavy, something expensive, something meant to make me choose between compliance and collapse. I didn't know yet what it would look like, but I could feel it coming. It arrived on a Tuesday. I woke up early, coffee in hand, planning to run a load of hay to the south barn before the heat settled in. Same routine, same quiet morning. I rolled the Chevy down the gravel road we'd carved back to life, thinking about nothing more complicated than the weather. Then, I rounded the curve near the tree line. I hit the brakes so hard the coffee sloshed against the dashboard. There it was. Overnight, like something that had grown out of the ground while I slept. A steel gate stretched clean across the road, 12 feet wide, painted black. Square posts sunk deep into fresh concrete that hadn't even cured yet. This wasn't a farm gate, this was commercial. Right in the middle sat a keypad. Off to the side, a small black camera angled perfectly toward a driver's face. Waiting. Watching. I climbed out slowly and walked closer. The sign bolted to the bars was brand new. Authorized vehicles only. Below that, in smaller print, managed by Access Management LLC. No county seal, no official HOA letterhead. Just a generic company name printed clean and confident. And then the line that changed everything. Road access fee, $300 per month. They hadn't sued me. They hadn't cited me. They hadn't arrested me. They had monetized me. I rested my hand on the cold steel and stood there for a long moment. Not angry yet. Something heavier than that. Something quieter. I turned off the truck. The engine ticked as it cooled, and the silence that followed wasn't peaceful anymore. It was the sound of a trap snapping shut. The anger didn't arrive all at once. It came in waves. The first wave hit before the engine even cooled. It was the heat in my chest when I read the sign again. $300. Not for maintenance, not for safety, just a toll. A hand held out where no hand belonged. The second wave came with the phone. I hadn't even made it back to the house before the messages started lighting up. Someone had already posted a photo of the gate, then another. Then a short clip of the keypad and the camera. The comments followed like sparks. That's illegal. It's your land. Rip it down. Hook a chain to your tractor and teach them a lesson. The advice was loud, immediate, certain. It felt good to read, if I'm honest. There's comfort in knowing other people are angry on your behalf. There's a pull to it. A gravity that says, do it now and you'll feel better. I stood there a long time after shutting the truck off, phone in my hand, staring at the gate through the windshield. I could already picture it. The chain, the low gear, the engine torque biting down. Steel posts popping loose from wet concrete like bad teeth. 30 seconds. Maybe less. I had the equipment. I had the strength. I had the right. I also had the camera staring back at me. That's when the anger shifted. It cooled just enough to sharpen. Because that gate wasn't just blocking a road. It was asking a question. What kind of man are you when someone dares you to be stupid? They wanted me loud. They wanted me on video. They wanted the headline written for them before I even knew I was playing a role. Local farmer destroys HOA property. Unhinged landowner takes the law into his own hands. I could feel how easy it would be to give them that. Lane showed up not long after, truck pulling up hard behind mine. He got out, took one look at the gate, and said the same thing everyone else was thinking. Say the word. I didn't answer right away. I walked over to the fence line and picked up a rock, rolled it in my palm, then set it back down. A small thing, a grounding thing. If I pull it down, I said finally, I win 30 seconds. Lane frowned. And if you don't? I looked at the camera, at the keypad, at the clean lettering on the sign. Then I win everything else. Ellie arrived next. She didn't say anything at first. She just stood there, arms crossed, jaw tight, eyes scanning details the way she always did when something mattered. The angle of the camera, the depth of the concrete pour, the way the sign was bolted on like it had been measured twice. "They planned this," she said quietly. "I know. They want you mad. I know." She looked at me then. Really looked. "So what do we do?" That was the moment. Not the gate, not the fee. The moment when someone who trusts you is waiting to see what kind of man you decide to be. I took a breath. Slow. Deliberate. "We don't touch it," I said. Lane stared at me like I just told him the sky was green. "You serious?" "Dead serious." I walked back to the truck and grabbed my tape measure. Not the chain, not the toe strap, the tape measure. Ellie's eyes widened a little when she realized what I was doing. I started documenting. The width of the gate, the distance between posts, the curing color of the concrete, the placement of the camera, the wording on the sign, every line, every letter, every logo. Ellie filmed, steady hands, no commentary. Lane wrote down times and dates. The anger didn't go away. It just found a job. That night, the comments kept coming. Friends, strangers, people who meant well, all of them telling me the same thing in 100 different ways. Don't let them do this to you. I didn't reply to any of it. Because here's the truth they don't put in the comments. Strength isn't what you do when you're furious. Strength is what you do when someone is counting on you to lose control. I sat at the kitchen table later, the house quiet, the gate still out there in the dark like a dare. I replayed my father's voice in my head, not words exactly, just the tone, the patience, the long view. Never swing before you understand the fight. That gate was bait. The fee was leverage. The camera was the witness they wanted. And for the first time since this started, I felt something solid settle in place beneath the anger. Resolve. If they wanted a spectacle, they weren't getting it. If they wanted a reaction, they'd have to wait. Because I wasn't going to tear down the gate. I was going to let it stand long enough to prove exactly who put it there and why. And when it finally came down, it wouldn't be because of my tractor. It would be because they'd built it on a lie. The noise didn't start loud. It started sideways. Someone reposted the video Ellie had taken of the gate. Just a slow pan. No commentary. No music. Steel posts, fresh concrete, the keypad, the sign, and that line at the bottom, clear as day. Managed by Access Management LLC. It sat there for a few hours, barely noticed. Then one person shared it with the caption, "Can they really do this?" Another added, "On his own land?" By nightfall, it wasn't ours anymore. The comments multiplied faster than I could read them. Some were furious, some were confused, some were absolutely certain they knew exactly what I should do next. "That's theft. That's extortion. Pull it down. Pull it down now." There it was again. The same 3 words, repeated like a chant. By morning, the video had crossed county lines. Then state lines, farmers, truckers, people who'd grown up on land and people who'd just inherited it. Folks who'd fought zoning boards, water districts, developers. They didn't all agree on politics or anything else, but they agreed on one thing. Nobody should have to pay to reach their own property. Local radio picked it up first. A morning host called and left a message on my phone, cheerful and hungry. "We'd love to have you on to tell your side." A local reporter emailed asking for a statement. Someone tagged the county office in the comments, demanding answers. I ignored all of it. That wasn't arrogance, it was discipline. The moment you start talking, you start shaping a story you don't control anymore. And I knew exactly what story they wanted. Angry farmer versus responsible community leaders. Sound bites, raised voices, a clip they could pause on my face and say, "See? So?" I stayed quiet. Inside Clearbrook Meadows, the mood shifted fast. Ellie showed me screenshots from the HOA Facebook group. Posts went up, then disappeared. Comments locked. Someone wrote, "This makes us look bad." Someone else replied, "He's trying to get attention." Another asked the wrong question out loud. "Why is a private company collecting fees?" That one didn't stay up long. People started messaging privately instead. Short notes, careful ones. "I don't agree with the gate. I didn't vote for this. Something feels off." None of them wanted their names attached, not yet. The pressure didn't just come from the internet, it came from town. The feed store owner asked me what was going on while he rang me up. The co-op manager said he'd heard something about a gate. A guy I'd known for years pulled me aside and said, "You should be careful. They're saying you're difficult." Difficult. That's what they call you when you don't do what you're told, and they can't quite say why. That afternoon, the HOA sent another email. Not to me, to the residents, framed as reassurance, temporary measures, safety review, third-party management. They never mentioned the fee amount. They never mentioned who owned the company managing the gate. They never mentioned me by name, which told me everything. Lane came by that evening with a stack of printouts, screenshots, comment threads, a flyer someone had slipped under windshields downtown. Unregulated farm traffic poses safety risk. My truck, photographed from a bad angle, blown up just enough to look menacing. "They're trying to turn the room against you," he said. "I know. What's the plan?" I laid everything out on the kitchen table, the video still frames, the sign, the LLC name, the timeline. I didn't say much. I didn't need to. Ellie traced the letters at the bottom of the sign with her finger. Access Management LLC. "That's not an HOA department," she said. "No. That's a business." "Yes." That word hung in the air longer than anything else had. A business doesn't care about harmony. A business doesn't care about views. A business cares about revenue. And suddenly the $300 made sense. That was the moment the noise outside stopped mattering. The shouting, the advice, the outrage. All of it faded into background static. Because I wasn't fighting a committee anymore. I was dealing with a model. Someone had figured out how to turn authority into income, how to wrap control in paperwork and sell it back to the people it restrained. I didn't need to pull the gate down to beat that. I needed to understand it. That night, I shut off my phone and pulled out my laptop. Not to read comments, not to argue, to look things up. Corporate registrations, filing dates, addresses, names. The noise could keep shouting. I was done listening. Because the fastest way to lose this fight would have been to answer everyone yelling, "Pull it down." And the fastest way to win it was to figure out who was getting paid to keep it standing. They didn't wait long. 3 days after the gate went up, the first truck didn't show. No call, no apology. Just an empty slot on the schedule where a load of feed was supposed to move before noon. I called the supplier, thinking it was a mix-up. He hesitated before answering, the way people do when they already know the answer won't help you. "County told us to hold," he said, "just until things clear up." Things. By that afternoon, a white pickup with a county seal rolled slowly down the edge of my property and stopped near the barn. 2 men stepped out, clean boots, clipboards. One of them adjusted his hat like he wasn't used to wearing it. They were polite, careful, almost apologetic. "We've received multiple reports," the taller one said. "Possible environmental concerns, drainage, sediment." I nodded. "From who?" He didn't answer that. He didn't have to. They walked the road, took photos, pointed at runoff channels Ellie had cut weeks earlier. One of them crouched near a shallow ditch and pressed a finger into damp soil as if moisture itself were suspicious. "We're issuing a temporary hold," the shorter one said finally. "Pending review." "How long?" I asked. He glanced at his clipboard. "Could be a few days, could be longer." "Longer how?" He shifted his weight. "Until it's resolved?" Resolved meant one thing: stop moving. By evening, the call came from the co-op. Then another buyer. Same story, same careful tone. No one wanted trouble. No one wanted to be the one caught hauling while the county was looking into it. The gate had stopped my truck. Now the paperwork stopped everyone else's. Ellie spread the notices out on the kitchen table, smoothing the edges like they might curl up and disappear if she didn't. Lane leaned against the counter, arms crossed, jaw tight. "This isn't about erosion," Lane said. "No," I answered. "This is about time. Because that's how you really break a farmer. Not with a fine, not with a threat. You starve the calendar. You delay just long enough that the season slips past you, that contracts expire, that animals eat through reserves you can't replace. By the next morning, I had numbers: fuel, feed, labor, missed deliveries, Penalties written into contracts I'd signed years ago when access had never been a question. The math was simple and ugly. 7 days. That's how long I had before the farm tipped from struggling into failing. Ellie said it out loud first. If this doesn't move fast, we're done. I didn't answer. I didn't need to. We all saw the same numbers. That afternoon, the HOA sent another message to residents, framed as concern. We are coordinating with county agencies to ensure environmental compliance. Temporary inconvenience. Community safety remains our priority. Temporary. Everything is temporary when you don't pay the cost. I drove down to the gate that evening, not to touch it, not to stare it down, just to stand there and feel the weight of it again. The camera blinked once, red light steady. Watching. I thought about every person who'd told me to pull it down. How easy it would feel in the moment. How good it would look on video. How fast the story would turn. And how, an hour later, I'd be the one explaining to a judge why I thought anger counted as a legal argument. I went back inside and shut the door. That night, the kitchen table stopped being a place for meals. Ellie opened her laptop. Lane brought in another chair. I cleared space and started stacking documents, county plats, old surveys, emails from the HOA, the environmental notices, the sign text printed out and highlighted. We worked without talking for a while. Then Ellie said, "Look at this." She turned the screen toward me. A business registry page, Access Management LLC, filed recently. No history, no projects listed, no employees on record. "Scroll," I said. She did. An address popped up. Not an office park. Not a commercial building, a residential street. "That's not a business address," Lane said. "No," Ellie answered. "That's someone's house." The ticking got louder in my head. 7 days, 6 now. We pulled more records, payment structures, generic language about access optimization, and compliance facilitation. Nothing concrete, nothing transparent. A model. They hadn't just blocked a road. They'd built a system designed to look official enough to scare suppliers and flexible enough to squeeze money out of anyone desperate enough to pay. And now they'd tightened it, leaning on the county just hard enough to make everyone else step back. I closed my eyes for a moment and let myself feel the fear, not panic. Fear's quieter than that. It sits low. It asks practical questions. What if this doesn't work? What if you're wrong? What if they outlast you? Then I opened my eyes and pushed the laptop closer. "Keep digging," I said. "Names, addresses, anything that connects this company to the HOA." Lane nodded. "I'll start calling around, quietly." Ellie was already typing. That night, I slept maybe 2 hours. Not because I was angry, but because time had become something you could hear breathing in the room with you. By morning, the gate hadn't moved, the county hadn't called, and the clock was still ticking. They thought pressure would make me fold. They thought time was on their side. They were about to learn something important. Time only works for people who don't panic. And I wasn't done yet. The address wouldn't leave my head. It sat there on the screen like a loose thread you can't stop touching once you notice it. A residential street, no suite number, no commercial zoning, just a house pretending to be a company. I'd seen that before. Not in my life, but in court filings, stories passed around by men who'd learned the hard way that control rarely wears a uniform anymore. It wears an LLC. Ellie pulled up the county parcel map and overlaid it with the business registration address. The lines snapped together too cleanly. Same block, same lot dimensions. "That's not an accident," she said. "No," I answered. "That's a hiding place." We pulled tax records next. Public ones, boring ones. The kind no one thinks to look at because they assume corruption is always dramatic. It isn't. It's clerical. The house belonged to an elderly woman, fixed income, paid off. No liens, nothing unusual, until Ellie clicked one more tab. "Dad," she said quietly. She rotated the laptop toward me. The last name matched, not mine. Not the HOA's official name, the president's. I didn't speak, neither did Lane. We all leaned closer, like lowering our voices would somehow make the truth less sharp. "This is her mother's house," Ellie said. "Same last name, same age bracket, same mailing address on multiple filings." Lane exhaled slowly. "So, the company collecting fees on your road is registered to her family," I finished. We didn't celebrate. We didn't smile. Because this wasn't victory yet. This was motive. We dug deeper. The LLC had been formed 3 months earlier, right after the HOA board meeting where traffic complaints about farm vehicles first showed up in the minutes. The same meeting where temporary access management solutions had been discussed and never voted on. That detail mattered because HOA boards can't just invent revenue streams. They need votes. They need disclosure. They need records. Access Management LLC had none of that. Instead, it had invoices. Ellie found them next, buried in HOA expense summaries, not itemized, not explained. Just line entries labeled third-party compliance services. Same amount, repeated, monthly. Lane slapped the table once. They used dues to build the gate, and now they're charging you to use it, Ellie added. The room went quiet, because suddenly this wasn't about me paying $300 a month. It was about them using community money to build a toll booth on land they didn't own, and then funneling payments back through a company tied to the HOA president's own family. That's not oversight. That's a business model. I leaned back in my chair and closed my eyes for a moment. Not to rest, to think. 7 days. I didn't have time to savor this. I had time to move. I called the county clerk's office first, not angry, not accusing, curious. I asked about the reclassification request tied to the road, the one the HOA had hinted at in their letters. Oh, that, the clerk said. That was filed and denied, same day. Filed by who? She checked. Access Management LLC. I thanked her and hung up. Denied. Same day. No appeal, meaning they knew they didn't have authority. They just acted anyway. I called the sheriff's office next. Again, calm, precise. I told them a gate had been installed overnight, blocking access to an unmaintained public easement and private agricultural land. The deputy on the line took notes, asked for the location, asked for photos, gave me a report number. It wasn't enforcement yet, but it was paper. Lane nodded when I told him. Paper's how this ends. Ellie started organizing everything, not emotionally, structurally, dates, filings, addresses, screenshots with timestamps. She built folders the way some people build walls. That night, someone left a grocery bag hanging from the fence near the old entrance. Inside was a USB drive. No note, just the drive. We didn't plug it in right away. We sat there staring at it like it might bite. Lane broke the silence. You think it's someone inside, Ellie finished. We waited until morning. When we opened it, the contents were clean, deliberate, emails, HOA meeting minutes, internal memos discussing pressure tactics and access leverage. One thread caught my eye. If we restrict the road long enough, he'll have to negotiate. Another line, colder. The fee structure creates incentive to comply. I didn't need to read anymore. The smoking gun wasn't the gate. It wasn't the fee. It wasn't even the LLC. It was intent. They hadn't been mistaken. They hadn't been cautious. They had been strategic. I looked at the clock on the wall. Day 4. I finally knew who was holding the rope. And now that I did, the next move was obvious. I didn't need to pull the gate down. I needed someone who knew how to make people put their hands up. Someone who understood courts, discovery, silence. I picked up my phone. I didn't call a lawyer. I called Grace Holloway. Grace Holloway didn't arrive like someone coming to fight. She arrived like someone coming to end something. She pulled into the driveway just after sunrise in a faded gray Lincoln Town car. The kind of car you stop noticing because it's been around longer than most arguments. No logos, no flash, just miles, a lot of them. She stepped out wearing black jeans, boots that had seen both courtrooms and cow pastures, and a blazer that looked like it had lived on the back of a chair since the late 90s. Her hair was silver, pulled back tight. Her eyes were sharp in the way only people who've been lied to for 40 years develop. She didn't shake hands. She didn't smile. She said, "Show me everything." We covered the kitchen table. Deeds, county plats, easement maps, HOA emails, screenshots, LLC filings, payment summaries, the USB drive. Grace didn't skim. She read like someone measuring a body for a coffin. When she finished, she looked up once. "They don't have jurisdiction," she said. I nodded. "And they know it." Another nod. She tapped the photo of the gate with 2 fingers. That's unlawful obstruction of a public access easement. Then she slid the LLC paperwork closer. And this is self-dealing. Lane let out a low whistle. Grace opened her yellow legal pad and wrote 3 words, slow and deliberate. Emergency injunction. Hearing. We don't argue, she said. We don't negotiate. We force discovery. 3 days later, we were in court. Courthouses don't look like justice. They look like paperwork. Gray walls, hard benches, coffee that tastes like it was filtered through cardboard, a metal detector that beeps at belt buckles older than the deputies running it. But justice lives there if you know how to find it. The HOA's legal team sat across the aisle. Expensive suits, perfect posture, tablets glowing. They looked prepared. Karen Vance, president of the Clearbrook Meadows HOA, was not there. Neither was her husband. That absence spoke louder than any opening statement. The judge entered, a woman in her 50s, posture like granite, eyes that didn't blink often, the kind of person who didn't care how confident you sounded, only how precise you were. Grace stood first. Your Honor, she said, this is a case of unlawful obstruction of a public access easement, misappropriation of HOA funds, and coercive pressure intended to force a landowner into financial submission. No flourish, no emotion. The opposing attorney rose, smiling the smile of someone trained to deflect. Your Honor, this is a misunderstanding. The gate was installed in good faith to protect the community while environmental concerns were addressed. Grace didn't respond. She placed the first document on the table. This is the county plat map. It shows the HOA boundary ends 71 feet before the roadway. The judge leaned forward, looked, nodded once. Grace placed the second document. This is the reclassification request filed by Access Management LLC, submitted and denied on the same day. The smile across the aisle tightened. Grace placed the third document. This is the LLC registration. Access Management LLC is registered to a residential address belonging to Martha Higgins, the mother of HOA President Karen Vance. A murmur rippled through the gallery. Grace continued, voice level. HOA dues were used to construct the gate. Fees were then charged to the plaintiff through this entity. The room shifted, not loudly, completely. The judge raised an eyebrow, turned a page, then another. The opposing attorney opened his mouth. Grace didn't let him. And here, she said, placing the final document down, are internal HOA communications outlining a strategy to restrict road access in order to apply financial pressure for compliance or forced negotiation. Silence. Not shocked silence. Recognizing silence. The judge held out her hand. The clerk passed her the document. She read it slowly, carefully. When she looked up, she didn't look at Grace. She looked at the other table. Counsel, she said calmly, sit down. He did. The ruling came clean and sharp. The gate was to be removed within 72 hours. The HOA was barred from asserting jurisdiction over the roadway. Damages for restricted agricultural operations would be awarded. A formal inquiry into financial misconduct would proceed. One strike of the gavel. Final. Outside the courthouse, cameras waited. Reporters waited. Residents waited. Karen Vance exited through a side door 10 minutes later. She didn't stop. She didn't smile. But for a split second, she looked at me. And in her eyes, I didn't see anger anymore. I saw fear, because she knew the inquiry wasn't just about the gate. It was about everything. We drove home that afternoon in silence. When we reached the road, the gate was still standing, but it was already dead. They didn't announce it. No emails, no apologies, no carefully worded notices pretending this had all been a misunderstanding. The gate didn't come down with speeches or cameras. It came down on a quiet Thursday morning. I was sitting on the porch with a mug of black coffee, the kind that tastes like it came out of a shop class toolbox, when I heard the engine ease down the road. Not fast, not timid, just steady. A county truck, white paint dulled by years of sun, a flatbed behind it. Ellie stepped out beside me. Lane followed a moment later, hands in his pockets, hat pulled low. 3 county workers climbed out. No questions, no hesitation. One of them tipped his chin at me. Here for the removal, he said. I nodded once. They didn't treat it like a spectacle. They treated it like work. Concrete saws came out. A portable generator was unloaded. One man marked the footings with chalk. Another braced the gate so it wouldn't fall wrong when the cuts were made. The saw started up, high-pitched, shrill. Sparks jumped like fireflies in the morning shade. It wasn't a pleasant sound. It wasn't cinematic. It was necessary. Steel gave way first. Bolts loosened. The post shifted slightly when the concrete finally cracked. The gate sagged, then lowered into the bed of the truck with a dull, final thud. Just like that, it was over. The oldest of the workers wiped his forehead with a bandana and said, almost to himself, "Shame it came to this." I looked down the open road. Sunlight ran clean along the gravel where the gate had stood. "No," I said. "It came exactly where it needed to." They packed up without ceremony. The truck rolled away. Dust settled. Silence returned. But this time, it was different. A few minutes later, a sound carried up the road. Diesel. A delivery truck eased forward, the same one that had been turned away weeks earlier. The driver slowed when he saw me standing there, then grinned and lifted a hand off the wheel in a small wave as he rolled past the spot where the gate had been. The road answered him. Gravel shifted. Tires settled. Life moved through. Ellie exhaled beside me like she'd been holding her breath for months. Lane let out a quiet laugh. Not loud, just relieved. Freedom doesn't arrive with fireworks. It arrives with motion. The days that followed were quieter than I expected. No victory laps, no public statements. Karen Vance didn't make an announcement. The HOA board didn't issue a correction. People simply stopped pretending nothing had happened. The county inquiry moved forward, slowly, thoroughly. That kind of thing doesn't need shouting. It needs time. I went back to work. Feed ran on schedule again. Contracts resumed. Buyers called back like the interruption had never happened. The farm didn't celebrate. It recovered, which felt better. One afternoon, Ellie came home with a question the county had asked her. "They want to name the road," she said. Lane smirked. "Long as it ain't Clearbrook Drive Extension," Ellie nudged me. So, I didn't have to think. My father had walked this land long before any of this. Taught me how to work it. Taught me when to stand and when to wait. When not to swing. "He's the reason I didn't fold," I said. "The reason I didn't break that gate." I looked down the gravel, sunlight stretching between the cottonwoods like a ribbon unrolling. "Grayson Trail," I said. The name didn't sound new. It sounded like it had always been there. A week later, the county installed the sign. Simple white post, green plate, white letters, Grayson Trail. I didn't take a picture. I didn't post it anywhere. I didn't need to. I drove the road that evening with the windows down, wind warm, engine steady, past the fields, past the fence line, past the place where Steele had once tried to decide who I was allowed to be. When I reached the highway, I didn't turn around right away. I sat there for a moment, one hand on the wheel, watching traffic move in both directions. No rush, no pressure, no walls, just choice. People keep asking me what the lesson is. They want something simple, something they can repeat. Here it is. They brought paper to take my freedom. I use better paper to bury them, because land outlasts committees. Work outlasts rules written by people who don't understand it. And freedom, real freedom, doesn't come from breaking things in anger. It comes from standing still long enough for the truth to do its work. This land was here before them. And as long as I'm breathing, it'll be here after.